we need to signal that we are prepared to take up the slack. That if the US no longer is willing to support Ukraine to the extent it has to date, then other countries will do that.
November's US presidential election will matter, arguably, more than any US election in recent modern times, and not just for America. What are the implications then of a second Trump presidency for the West, for the rest of the world? I want to welcome to the show Lord McDonald, the former head of the diplomatic service. Welcome to you, Simon.
Hello, John.
Hi. Now, look, you have joined, haven't you, in a triumvirate of diplomatic former mandarins, alongside Lord Kerr, who was another former head of the Foreign Office, and Sir Peter Westmacott, who's a former, among other things, American ambassador. So diplomatic big hitters here. And you're warning of what you call massive security risks that would go with Donald Trump being elected this year for a second term. Tell me, what are those risks in your view?
I think most of the risks are on foreign security and defense policy, because in his statements since leaving the White House, Mr. Trump has shown repeatedly that his analysis and his policies are different from those of the UK and the rest of the West, particularly on Ukraine, on NATO, on environment, and on China.
Yes.
Four of the biggest challenges we collectively face.
And your concern is not simply that they are different, but they run directly contrary to the British, European,
Correct.
NATO line as it is. I mean, tell me the extent to which you fear that America could actually leave NATO and could, I think the phrase has been used, throw Ukraine under a bus.
Well, taking those in turn, on NATO, Mr. Trump is hostile, was hostile whilst in the White House, complained that other allies didn't carry their fair share of the burden. And it is true that even in the 2020s, the United States provides about 40% of Europe's security inside Europe. So this is an ally in North America doing an awful lot for the continent of Europe, and he thought that was wrong and should change. Led by Secretary General Stoltenberg, NATO has changed. Most member states have recommitted to the 2% spend, and quite a lot of them are now achieving that. But that is not good enough for Mr. Trump. He wants more. He thinks that Europe can look after itself and that US interests have shifted elsewhere in the world. So that is a major headache. The US Congress has responded. The US Congress last month passed a law saying the president couldn't unilaterally take the United States out of NATO, that there would have to be a supermajority in Congress to allow that. Yeah. But if the US president is hostile, that puts the alliance in a very difficult place. Right. On Ukraine, he thinks he can do a deal with President Putin in an afternoon. I think that is flat wrong, that he would find Mr. Putin a very difficult negotiator, that he wouldn't prioritize anybody else's interests, and that, as you say, what might happen is that Ukraine is thrown under a bus.
These are alarming thoughts. And clearly, Simon, you do not take comfort from the idea that Donald Trump, as he was in his first term as president, may be restrained by some of those around him. We saw that people like General Mattis, General Kelly, William Barr, his attorney general, and others, they restrained some of what Donald Trump might have done and in the end did not do in the way that he was contemplating. You don't feel comfort that that may happen again?
Not at all. First time round, Mr. Trump relied heavily on the Republican Party establishment. He wasn't really expecting to win the presidency, so he took advice from outsiders. This time, I think he will rely very much on himself, on his own instincts, and on the uber loyalists. So people like Barr and Tillotson will be missing. Key appointments will be people who owe their entire position to Mr. Trump and who are very happy to do precisely his bidding.
So tell me your thinking then behind your warning today. If there's an American president who wants to pull out of NATO with all of the massive disruption and weakening of NATO that could involve, or pull away and stop supporting Ukraine. What could the West do about that? What could Europe do? What could the UK do, Simon?
I think we have the best part of a year to prepare. The threat, the problem, I think, is sharper for Ukraine than for NATO. So I think in private, and it is key that these talks start off in private, because if they are public, they might play into the US campaign in a way inimical to our objectives. But in private, we need to think through the consequences, and we need to signal that we are prepared to take up the slack. That if the US no longer is willing to support Ukraine to the extent it has to date, then other countries will do that. Other countries, principally NATO's European allies.
All right. Can I turn to Gaza? Those are interesting thoughts. Can I just turn to Gaza for a moment? The former Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, was talking on Times Radio this morning about Gaza and the approach to Gaza. Just have a listen to this.
What I would urge Israel to do is to allow access to the media to Gaza, because ultimately we all rely on the mainstream media and the free press to help inform us, and I don't think it helps anyone when there's such restrictions, because we can't take that view, and we end up where we are currently is a sort of slanging match between those who try and ask legitimate questions, and those who say, "Oh, you're only asking that because you're anti." I was accused of being anti-Semitic because I just challenged IDF's methods. I didn't challenge Israel's right to defend itself, but somehow I'm labelled as that at the moment. So I think the best thing is let a free press in to look at it. But ultimately, what we have to ask ourselves is, the Prime Minister of Israel presided over probably one of the biggest intelligence failures of Israel's recent history.
That's Ben Wallace, Simon, speaking earlier on. He's described the Israeli action in Gaza as crude and indiscriminate. He's used the phrase killing rage. Do you agree with that? Is there a need to do more to, I don't know, what's the phrase, rein in, warn Israel about its conduct?
I don't agree, although I respect Mr. Wallace's words and approach. I think everyone on the outside has to remember what happened on the 7th of October and the deep impact in Israel of what happened on the 7th of October. Since then, it is true, no matter the disputes around figures, that at least 10 times as many Palestinians have died as Israelis died on the 7th of October. So since then, there has clearly been a reaction that has killed too many Palestinians. But even though that is a fact, I'm not going to sit in the UK and lecture the Israelis on the detail of how they prosecute their self-defense. All I would say is that no matter how justified their cause, their actions long-term can make their own situation worse.
Right. Okay. That is I suppose, a diplomatic response, as one might expect. But we have seen Britain, alongside the European Union and the US, rebuking a member of the Israeli government on the right of that coalition, who's spoken about Palestinians voluntarily emigrating from Gaza, which goes against policy. It goes against the rules of conduct as we understand it. They're sort of seeking migration of people from a war zone. What do you make of that? Do you agree with that rebuke? Does it concern you, what we've been hearing from some within the Israeli government?
I strongly agree with that rebuke. I think it's a nonsense to talk about a voluntary expatriation of Palestinians. Gaza is Palestinian land. This is home to more than 2 million Palestinians. The idea that at the suggestion of a right-wing Israeli minister, Palestinians would choose to go and live elsewhere, and precisely where, nobody's volunteering to take Palestinians away from their home. I think the suggestion is a nonsense.
Right, so that's a rebuke for that right-wing Israeli minister. But the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, has spoken against the idea of a two-state solution. He is seen as a very hard-line influence, and he's at the top of the government. That is a cause of concern?
we disagree with Mr. Netanyahu. The British government for at least 2 decades has embraced a two-state solution. All parties in the British Parliament embrace a two-state solution. Mr. Netanyahu has been there a long time, but he is not a permanent feature of Israeli politics.
All right, Simon McDonald, Lord McDonald, former head of the Foreign Office, for those thoughts today here on Drive. Thank you.